At some point, the tempests of the external world and the turmoil of our mind meet, jeopardizing the delicate equilibrium of the soul. It is usually not the great tragedies that hurt us, but the little subliminal acts, words, actions, and situations that cut into the very fabric of our soul. But within ourselves exists a power even more vast than any power outside, the ability to stay unruffled, to convert anguish into transparency, and to make it impossible for anything or anybody ever to ruffle our serenity again. In the trenches of each human mind, there exists an area rarely visited, a place mysterious and indispensable, where are those parts of ourselves that we never admit. These are not just weaknesses or flaws in the common sense, they are the shadowed aspects of our personality, the repressed impulses, desires, fears, resentments that we unconsciously suppress or deny. To be unaware of this shadow is to live a life forever vulnerable to being struck. The world can strike, insult, or disappoint, and still the real power of these agitations lies not merely in their outer existence, but in the rich soil of unexplored shadows in ourselves. The shadow is not bad in itself, it is merely unknown. It is the sum of parts of ourselves that we have disowned, either because of fear, shame, or socialization. All of these unadmitted characteristics, anger, envy, selfishness, or insecurity, are in the unconscious, quietly affecting our thoughts, responses, and choices. If an incident comes along that reflects an unstated vulnerability, the psyche responds to it with excessive hurt or bewilderment. We can be hurt by someone's words or deeds, but really the hurt is to a part of ourselves that has not been made conscious. This is why outside trouble is always such a sinister feeling, because they stir up shadows that we have ignored to acknowledge and comprehend. To start the process of emancipation, one must turn towards the shadow with courage and honesty. This is no superficial exercise in denial or forced repression. This is an act of radical self-confrontation. Gaze inward without bias, without self-judgment. See the impulses that emerge spontaneously, those flashes of jealousy when one succeeds, of annoyance at slight provocation, of fear that causes avoidance or indecision. These are not deviations, they are the unprocessed material of the shadow that needs to be integrated. To dismiss them is to allow them to become the masters of our emotional life. The way of freedom demands first that we light up the shadowy regions of our mind, as a miner carries a lamp into the great underground caverns of the earth. By seeing without judgment, we permit the contents of the unconscious mind to rise into awareness. It is usually painful. The shadow, when brought into the light, may look monstrous, disorganized, and terrifying. But this is all the more reason to confront it. The more intensely we fight the shadow, the stronger it is. Every denial, every effort to push back at what is in us reaffirms its control, and life seems to batter us with challenges that are relentless and unaccountable. Integration, therefore, is not the destruction of the shadow, but the acknowledgement and embrace of it as part of the wholeness of the self. When one is willing to embrace envy, anger, or fear without shame, these forces lose their power to control or blindside. They become understandable, controllable, and ultimately redemptive. It is in this reconciliation that the person achieves mastery over inner responses. No longer a marionette to impulses long suppressed and disowned. A mindful mind is not a mind that lacks shadows. It is a mind that has become familiar with them, knowing their genesis, their character, and their proper role in the totality. The process is psychological and mystical. When the shadow becomes conscious, the person feels an amazing change. Troubles from the outside world, hurtful words, rejections, or disappointments lose some of their power. One understands that what was once a source of anger or despair was merely a reflection of inner splits, a shadow left unexamined. Acknowledgement of those parts in oneself brings a deep feeling of empowerment and calm, for one has stopped giving power to outside forces to disrupt an uninvestigated interior. It is necessary, though, to enter into this interior work patiently and with self-kindness. The shadow is not extinguished at once, nor is one to try to destroy it. The goal is awareness, not destruction. Watch the shadowed impulses as they emerge, analyze their origins, comprehend their impact upon conduct, and incorporate them into the conscious personality gradually. This way, one develops hardness and inner freedom. The person discovers that suffering is never just a straightforward product of circumstance, but a multifaceted interplay between exterior events and unrecognized interior content. This realization changes the experience of life itself. No longer is the person passive in the face of adversity. Rather, every difficulty, every challenge is a reflection of the interior self, By being mindful to these thoughts, by accepting the shadow in fearlessness and deniallessness, one achieves a level of mastery over the self that makes outside forces powerless. Nothing and no one may really torment the person who has confronted the shadow with wisdom and with courage, for the source of turmoil has been moved from the unconscious to the conscious mind, where it can be seen, understood, and made harmonious. Therefore, the development of shadow awareness is not an intellectual practice, it is the essence of inner sovereignty. It is the condition for a life that remains unruffled by the chaos of the outside world, a life in which peace does not depend on things, but upon the deep realization of who one is. When the shadow is recognized, it is given a name and it is welcomed. The storms of life can rage on, but the soul remains steadfast, unmovable, and intact. To become detached is not to cut oneself off from life or to shut the heart against the experiences that make us human. Too many confuse detachment with coldness, indifference, or numbness. But the soul is aware that to withdraw from the world is not the way to freedom, but to find a state of consciousness wherein one can watch the happenings of life without being consumed or distorted by them. Life, with all its turmoil, its betrayals, its transitory joys, and its deep sorrows, constantly tries to leave an impression on us of disturbance. The one who has not awakened yet to the inner truths tends to be buffeted like a leaf blown by the wind, responding involuntarily to every fluctuation on the surface level. Detachment at its best enables one to remain steadfast at the center of the maelstrom, untouched by its turmoil but sensitized to it. The initial step towards developing detachment is to observe the world as it actually is and not filter through personal wish or projection. Human affairs, the actions of men and women, and the whims of fate are misconstrued as personal affronts because the mind confuses outer events with inner reality. When we are insulted, betrayed, or let down by someone, it is not the act itself that hurts us, but the meaning we attribute to it. We empower events when we endow them with meaning that they do not necessarily have. Detachment occurs when we witness these events in a light that enables us to see them without owning them. It is the awareness that the turbulence of life is outside currents and do not necessarily agitate the depth of our being unless we allow it to. Detaching means developing the ability to observe without judgment, to notice the dance of life as moving pictures on a movie screen. As clouds across the sky, circumstances float by and are gone. They are fleeting, temporary, and often not within our power to change. The detached mind does not recoil, does not cling, and does not resist. It simply observes. It is not a cerebral process, but an earnest confrontation of the moment, whereby one may meet life in all its fullness without permitting it to control the beat of one's inner life. Detachment, nonetheless, does not imply withdrawal. It doesn't mean a rejection of emotion, a refusal to care about anyone or anything, or an existence spent in sterile isolation. Detachment rather takes courage, the courage to feel deeply but remain unpossessed by the turmoil around us. It is the acknowledgement that our inner life is its own kingdom, and that though we may share in the happenings of the outer world, we don't have to be overcome by them. One can act love and engage with vigor and sincerity, yet still retain a space of undisturbed consciousness, a sanctuary within where the self is free. To cultivate this state, one must begin with reflection and self-observation. The mind, if left unexamined, is easily pulled into reactive patterns, responding automatically to every insult, every disappointment, and every external provocation. Detachment results when the self realizes these patterns and refuses to be controlled by them. Detachment is a voluntary discipline, a constant practice of paying attention to the self in connection with the world. By doing this, one slowly frees themselves from the demands of reaction and finds a steady center, an inner balance that cannot be disturbed by circumstance. Detachment also promotes wisdom. When the mind is not clouded with reactive emotion, one acquires the clarity to see life as it really is, undistorted. Things are observed for their intrinsic nature, people for their real character, and intentions for their actual purposes. One comes to act suitably instead of on impulse, to respond instead of reacting, and to find one's way through the subtleties of life with discrimination and calmness. Detachment, then, is not flight. It is mastery, a mastery of the psyche and the realization that the ability to disturb or afflict us is not external, but in the unexamined mind. Lastly, detachment does not deny compassion or participation in the world. It rather makes possible a deeper, richer participation. Once one is no longer controlled by fear, anger, and resentment, one can greet others with clarity, empathy, and understanding. One can act wisely and decisively, not in reaction, but out of a deep sense of purpose. Detachment creates room for the soul to meet life on its terms, unbeset by its storms. Therefore, to live detached yet not indifferent is to live life with open eyes and an unshakable heart. It is to be of the world, but not possessed by it. It is to acknowledge that the tempests of life, as certain as they are, have no need to descend to the depths of our soul. And it is in this practice that the unshakable refuge within is found, a sanctuary where nothing and no one can effectively harm the soul. Detachment, then, is not renouncing life, but the realization of deep freedom, a freedom not generated by circumstances but by consciousness itself. It is a basic fact, however, one that is not generally appreciated, that nobody can really hurt us against our will. The external world, with all its demands, slights, and goads, possesses no necessary power over the inner life of the person beyond that which the person gives it. Suffering comes for the most part not from things but from the unconscious and involuntary responses of the psyche. When we feel anger, resentment, or despondency, we need to ask ourselves, is this suffering born of the external universe, or is it a reflection of what remains unexamined within us? Think of the human compulsion to blame others for our mood. A cruel word, a betrayal, or an insult can pierce us like a dagger, sending us reeling and helpless. Yet, upon closer examination, one realizes that the wound exists not merely in the action of the other, but in the response it evokes within us. It is the mind that suffers, the psyche that trembles, the spirit that recoils. The external event is merely a spark. It is our internal fire that determines the intensity and duration of the pain. To embrace this reality is to restore the final sovereignty over our emotional lives. Taking responsibility for one's own responses does not mean repression of feeling, nor repression of human frailty. Instead, it is an invitation to profound self-reflection. When we feel the rush of anger or the sting of humiliation, we are offered a moment to monitor our own inner workings. Why does this word hurt me so deeply? Why is this act troubling me so deeply? In searching for the reason, we are forced to face aspects of self that are unrecognized, unresolved, or broken. The person who derides us becomes a teacher, a mirror that reflects the areas in us that need to be understood and integrated. In assuming responsibility for our response, we transition from the domain of passive endurance to active involvement of the self. The process is not instant or easy. It needs courage, honesty, and tenacity. One has to develop the ability to stop before reacting, to witness the emergence of feelings without acting on them instantly. This stoppage, apparently insignificant, harbors within it the seeds of change. It is here in this space of reflection that the individual finds freedom to decide knowingly how to respond to each situation. Furthermore, understanding our role in causing our own pain involves understanding that our perceptions are always colored. The mind experiences life through a lens developed by personal history, belief systems, and unconscious patterning. The same word uttered by various persons, or even by one and the same person at diverse times, will provoke quite different responses from us. It is not the external stimulus by itself that produces distress, therefore, but the complicated interaction between the external and the inner psychic state. By grasping this, we realize the authority to stay unshaken lies not in mastering others, but in developing command over our own inner life. Embracing this duty also means embracing the universality of discomfort, conflict, and challenge. The world will continue to disturb, test, and provoke, but these perturbations no longer need determine the condition of our being. When we stop blaming our misery on others, we take back our power. We realize that the offenses, betrayals, and hurdles are not tyrants but invitations, inviting us to become stronger, smarter, and more grounded. Under this new light, adversity is no longer a curse, but a tool for personal growth. It is necessary to see that this control over reactions is not withdrawal from the world, but a response to it on a very deeper plane. The individual who has absorbed this fact does not become apathetic, nor permits injustice to go unseeingly. Instead, one engages the world with a purity of vision and a firmness of mind that leaves manipulation, provocation, and insult impotent. The external world can rage, but the internal world is unruffled. The storms no longer sweep away the foundations of the psyche because they have been strengthened by self-knowledge and regular reflection. Finally, the process of taking responsibility for one's own response is one of sovereignty over the self. It is one of liberation, wherein we discover that authentic power does not lie in controlling the outside world, but in owning the inside. In taking this responsibility, we turn our vulnerabilities into strengths, our pain into wisdom, and our emotional life into a fountain of liberty. The insight breaks in that though we may not always be able to control what happens to us, we can always control what happens inside of us. This is not a philosophical concept, it is a practical, real-time and redemptive one. Let us then embark on this journey. Let us watch our responses, challenge our emotional reactions, and take back the power that has ever been in us. Let us acknowledge that the world can provoke, but we are not required to be disturbed. In taking responsibility for our inner life, we find the key to resilience, the practice of serenity, and the deep wisdom that the self, once sovereign, can never be troubled by any external power. It is in this sovereign center that we are truly free, the freedom to live untroubled, unmoved, and completely our own. To feed the world within is to embark upon a path of intentional awareness to the inner recesses of the psyche, a journey that exceeds the surface deceptions of ordinary life. Most live as though life were a mere series of events outside of oneself, as though one's happiness and misery were solely functions of circumstance. But the reality is more intricate, more mysterious. The world that we see outside is a mere reflection of the world inside. If the inner world is taken for granted, if it is allowed to wander around in unconscious patterns and unanalyzed impulses, then the soul will be weakened, vulnerable to the turbulences of luck, the caprices of others, and the apparently capricious hurts that life throws. A nurtured inner world, on the other hand, offers sanctuary, a rich well of stability from which self may watch, translate, and react without being engulfed. Self-knowledge is the starting point for this nourishment. To know oneself truly is to strip away the layers of persona and social need, to find the genuine self behind the masks that are assumed in order to cope with the needs of the outside world. The unexamined life is a garden with an overgrowth of weeds, suppressed fears, unworked memories, and unresolved conflicts bloom, but are not visible until they erupt in unpredictable fashion. By looking inward, examining dreams, urges, and patterns of mind, the person starts to nurture understanding. One comes to know the sources of anger, fear, and lust, and therefore one is less apt to be overwhelmed by them. Reflecting is not passive, it is active self-engagement. When one views one's responses, queries their origins, and demands comprehension, the psyche starts to restructure itself. Thought becomes conscious emotion tempered by wisdom, and the soul gains a strength that the outside world cannot break through. It is a courageous process, for the truths that are found there may be painful, testing long-held beliefs, challenging assumptions, and confronting long-repressed shadows. And yet, only by meeting these truths are the inner world and its psychology able to be strengthened, for the repressed shadow, unacknowledged and unintegrated, influences in hidden and erosive manner. Creativity is another vital component of this feeding. The psyche yearns to express itself, and if not given healthy expression, its energy can come out destructively in the form of neurosis, compulsion, or resentment. Creative activity, whether in the form of art, writing, music, or creative action, acts as both a mirror and a bridge. It reflects the unseen contents of the inner life, making them visible and concrete, and enables the person to structure and reshape these contents into forms that confer coherence and meaning. By creation, one gains a conversation with oneself, an active interaction which promotes development, comprehension, and harmony. Not the product, but the process has deeper meaning. In describing the interior, one accords it recognition, allows it room, and thus lessens its ability to function unawares. Just as vital is the development of solitude. In stillness, the mind has the space to breathe, to center itself, and to tap into deeper currents of being that exist below the level of everyday perception. Solitude is not loneliness, it is conscious space where one may meet oneself in a true manner. In this space, the passing distractions of the world fall away, and one may commune with the archetypal forces that inform thought, feeling, and personality. With this participation, the individual gains an awareness of life's larger patterns, of the recurring themes that regulate human experience, and of the ever-enduring rhythms that underlie pain and pleasure. It is from this insight that an attitude can emerge in which interruptions from outside weaken their bite, because the self knows itself as component of a greater structured whole. The nurtured inner landscape then becomes a stronghold, not a stiffness, but of elastic strength. It is a locus from which the self is rooted, from which reaction is moderated by understanding and imagination, and from which the self may meet the external world without dread or coercion. In this inner sanctum, the turmoil of situation may rage, but it may not penetrate the inner stability. The individual who has developed such an inner world no longer requires external sources of validation and security alone, nor do they permit others' actions to control their sense of well-being. Rather, they move from a place of wisdom, reacting to life with consideration, understanding, and valor. To feed the world within is thus to be responsible for one's soul, to work with one's thoughts, feelings, and creative drives. It is to acknowledge that the external world is full of uncertainties, that people can behave in a manner that inflicts suffering, yet within is a space impervious to the whims of fate. By nurturing this interior life, suffering is converted to wisdom, chaos to understanding, and the storm of life into a palette for growth. Through all of this, the individual gains freedom that cannot be lost, strength that is sustainable, and peace that is both a shield and light by which to move through the world. We inhabit a world that demands permanence, but permanence is a mere elusive illusion. From the day we are born to the last breath we take, everything that comes our way is subject to modified decay and eventual loss. Mountains erode, rivers change direction, and even the strongest human connections come and go. But in the face of such inevitability, the human mind grasps so hard onto the fleeting, as though by keeping a tight grip on the fleeting we might in some way lock down our own stability. This grasping is at the root of much pain, for when that which we wish to last eternally starts to change or fade away, we feel as though the ground beneath our feet has been removed. To understand impermanence is not an intellectual task, it is a coming alive on a fundamental level. When we realize that the manifestations of life, the individuals, possessions, situations, and even the emotions are ephemeral, we start to release the hold of attachment that ties us to suffering. Think of a stormy lake. Its surface is churned into waves by the wind, swirling leaves and branches around, giving the appearance of upheaval. But under these ripples there is a deep, untrodden depth which is untouched, still and unaltered. So it is with the human soul. Our inner foundation, our awareness, can be unaffected while the outer circumstances rise and fall. The waves can look menacing, but they cannot touch the depths except we let them. That knowledge that all outer shapes are transient allows a radical change of outlook. Suffering, viewed through the prism of impermanence, ceases to be punishment and becomes instruction. Pain we experience, loss we suffer, and upsets we endure are like clouds floating by in the sky. They disappear with the sun of our consciousness still radiating behind. Nothing lasts but the ever-present process of change itself. To hold on to anything fleeting as if it were permanent is to invite frustration and misery, for the world can and will not adhere to our wishes. In addition, impermanence teaches the dependent nature of all things. As a flower blooms and wilts, as the seasons shift in a cyclical dance, so too do relationships, blessings, and experiences wax and wane. By seeing this pattern, we develop a sense of humility and acceptance. We learn that our own suffering is not an individual injustice, but an inevitable result of life's own impermanence. We learn to see that grief and happiness, victory and loss, sorrow and joy are all on the same continuum, one dependent upon the other to experience the completeness of life. But this acknowledgement of impermanence does not cause us to resign or back away from life. Instead, it causes us to become more engaged. When we know that all is transient, we are compelled to seize the moment more intensely and more clearly. Every meeting is more vivid, every sense more intense, for we no longer presume the fantasy that anything will last. Love, for example, is no longer owned but lived through to its time. Pain is no longer resented but a passing guest bringing wisdom and thought. By accepting the ephemeral nature of everything, we free ourselves from the oppression of expectation and become open to the depth of life as it happens. This awareness can be cultivated by mindful observation. Observe the passage of the day, the seasons changing, the flow and receding of emotions without attachment. Observe how thoughts come and go, how joy appears and disappears, how sorrow leaves its impression to fade away. In this exercise, the mind slowly absorbs the reality of impermanence, that all externals are fleeting. Yet the viewer within, our awareness, our ability to reflect endures. By anchoring ourselves in this inner depth, we gain a stability which the world cannot shake. Impermanence also teaches us resilience. Those who realize that all things are in a state of flux are less apt to be overwhelmed by bad luck, because they understand that today's suffering is not forever, nor is tomorrow's good fortune a certainty. Life's difficulties are seen as transient teachers, not fixed curses. Thus, patience and courage are nurtured because the psyche sees that suffering will vanish as certainly as joy can pass, and both are integral to the human experience. The rise and fall of experience, once so frightening, now becomes a pace that we can pace with equanimity. Ultimately, seeing impermanence is an invitation to live an authentic life. It asks us to let go of the illusions we hold on to and face reality in what it is instead of the way we want it to be. In embracing the temporary nature of life, we liberate ourselves from fear of loss, fixation on permanence, and the weight of attachment. We discover a deep freedom, a serenity that no external force can disturb, a lightness of being that allows us to move through the world with grace, awareness, and purpose. To live with the understanding of impermanence is to awaken to the fundamental truth of existence that all things change, all things pass, and yet within us there is a depth untouched by time, by circumstance, or by loss. Accept this fact and you will see that nothing can touch you irreparably, for you have found the unshakable rock in you, the infinite sanctuary of consciousness that observes the world's changes with serenity and insight. There is a point in life when the chaos of the external world menaces to trouble the delicate balance of the soul. We find ourselves in situations, words, and deeds that are apparently calculated to hurt us, and yet these sufferings do not beset us from the world itself, but are compounded by the unexamined depth of our own psyche. In order to liberate oneself from the influence of outside disturbance, first one must face the shadow within. This shadow is made up of those thoughts, fears, and attachments we have not embraced, those unconscious areas of the mind where resentment, insecurity, and unhealed pain reside. When we bring these aspects into conscious awareness, they no longer dominate us. Each imagined wound, each hurtful comment, each moment of distress is a reflection showing us an area of ourselves in need of attention and integration. In recognizing the shadow, we take back the freedom of our inner life and reduce the influence that outside forces had over us. Also crucial is the development of detachment without indifference. To be detached is not to withdraw from life, but to look at it with discernment and awareness. The turmoil that we use to permit to enter our mind are usually transient, superficial, or simply reflections of our inner turmoil. Through seeing events and actions as transient occurrences, we make room for our consciousness to freely function, unbound by reactive urges. Detachment is not aloofness, it is the voluntary decision to hold on to the sanctuary of the psyche while being in the world in a state of clarity. This habit enables one to face difficulty without being overwhelmed by it, to witness insult or disappointment without taking it personally and internalizing it as a wound. The third absolutely necessary principle is the accountability we have for our own responses. No person can actually injure us unless we allow it. Our feelings are not determined by what happens outside of us, they are created by our perception and interpretation of what happens. To be accountable for our reactions is to take command over our own awareness. It is not the stifling of emotion, but the intelligent working with it. By noting the manner in which our mind responds and electing how we shall respond, we recreate the terrain of pain into one of perception. The instant we understand that our internal state belongs to us to control, the world's ability to harm us is greatly reduced. Cultivating the inner world is the fourth alley. The psyche is healthy when it is cared for, explored, and expressed. Through examining the depths of self through reflection, learning, and creative effort, we bolster an inner sanctuary that is impervious to the storminess of external life. Dreams, symbols, and fantasy exercises disclose truth concerning our inner organization, so we can move about in the world with wisdom instead of fear. As we know ourselves better, the less vulnerable we are to the upsets from outside. By knowing ourselves, we develop an inner authority, a sanctuary where clarity, strength, and peace of mind abide. Awareness of impermanence is also essential. All things in the world outside are fleeting feelings, slurs, calamities, and opinions of others come and go like shadows on a lake's surface. As we turn our gaze upon what lies below the surface, we find that the integrity of our existence is unscathed. Suffering and distress are diminished in their sway when approached as transient motion upon an abiding basis. In understanding the impermanence of worldly troubles, we learn to see the world in a way that gives rise to calmness and understanding above reaction and despondency. Lastly, suffering becomes wisdom once we draw meaning out of it. Each test, each perceived transgression is a disguised teacher. If we look at the things of life with a thoughtful mind, we find lessons embedded in them. Lessons regarding ourselves, regarding others, and regarding the way of life. If suffering is seen thus, the world ceases to have authority over us. Rather, we gain mastery over the meaning of our own life and the evolution of our consciousness. By doing this, suffering is transformed into wisdom and wisdom into freedom. To live these teachings is to build an inner sanctuary resistant to the turmoil of the world outside. By accepting the shadow, living detachment, assuming responsibility for our responses, fostering the inner life, acknowledging impermanence, and converting suffering into wisdom, We liberate ourselves from the control that once befell us at the hands of others. No individual, no situation, no statement, and no deed can touch the one who has developed this level of awareness. The soul, once strengthened in this way, will be calm in turbulence, lucid in muddle, and intact in disintegration. The path to this inner liberty requires watchfulness, contemplation, and courage. It calls for deliberate involvement with the self and the willingness to approach discomfort instead of avoiding it. But the reward is beyond comparison. The power to remain unshaken in the midst of life's unavoidable storms, to confront challenges without sacrificing one's balance, and to feel an immense freedom that results from realizing that distress is present only where we place it. Seize this liberty, create your own inner oasis, and have the world's turbulence recede. No one and nothing can disturb the person who has become a master of inner sovereignty.